Hello, and welcome to this second episode of this K6 series of videos. Here, we are continuing the topic of SLOs and thresholds. Today, we will learn how to implement them in the K6 tool. In the previous episode, we reviewed SLOs, as well as SLAs, SLIs, and how do they relate to one of the functionalities of the K6 tool, thresholds. So, today we will see how to establish SLO thresholds in our K6 automations. But before we begin, a quick note. In the last episode, we provided a wide variety of examples of where you can apply all the SLs and thresholds such as CPU percent and disk space, among others. But the K6 tool focuses mostly on thresholds over default HTTP metrics or on custom metrics that you can create. For a list of available metrics and ways to create custom metrics, please go to k6.io/docs and refer to the metrics section in that documentation. So, for the rest of this video, we will not get too deep into details about metrics, but mostly on the thresholds applied to those metrics. Alright? With that cleared out, let's move on to the thresholds. Finally, for this example, we will use the Visual Studio Code Editor. But to work with K6 scripts, you can use any text editor of your preference. Alright, let's get onto this semi-ready script that I prepared for this video. As you can see, it just does 5 requests to the K6 test page. I named it thresholdsexample.js. Now, let's just run that script to see the basic results that we receive from just running it. To run the script, we will use now the command k6 run thresholdsexample.js, and then we just run it. After running it, as you can see, the default metrics that K6 reports are there. We have the metrics such as data sent and received, a bunch of HTTP requests metrics, such as the number of requests, duration, bytes sent and received, and many other basic metrics that you can see here. Many of those metrics, mainly the HTTP requests, have more than just a single metric, such as maximum, minimum, median percentages, and average, and many others. The different outputs on a metric depend on its type. K6 has 4 main types of metrics, which are counter, gauge, rate, and trend. For more information on each of them, please again check the K6 metrics documentation on the page that we mentioned earlier. Alright, let's pick a metric to create a threshold on it. How about we choose the HTTP request duration, which is a trend. I like that one a lot, I use it often, and many times, as I said, this metric is one of our biggest concerns. So let's work on the average for the HTTP request duration. As you can see from the panel, it took this amount of milliseconds. So let's create on that metric a threshold that we know it will easily pass. For this, first, we will append another command, export let option section, as we will be adding up some more options inside of it. Now, let's add there a thresholds section. Everything after that will be within the curly brackets defining anything about thresholds. Let's make space between them to add some stuff. As I mentioned, I want to focus in this example on the HTTP request duration. So let's indicate that by typing first HTTP_rec_duration followed by a colon. Now we will finally add our first threshold on it. Let's add some regular brackets now, and inside them we will be able to define each threshold. For now, let's add only one, shall we? Thresholds can be applied on the variables that each metric type has, as I mentioned. Since this one is a trend type, it has many variables on which we can apply the thresholds, so let's do it for now over the average. We will write it as it was displayed on the results. A, V, and G. On it, we will apply our first threshold in milliseconds. So I want something easy to pass for now. So let's put a threshold for the average to be smaller than 10,000. In other words, 10 seconds. Easy peasy. Definitely it will pass it. We save it and let's run it again. As you can see, now we have a green check mark left to the request duration line. Congratulations! That means the test passed our first threshold. Woohoo! Now, let's change it for a value that it will definitely not pass. Let's say that it must be smaller than 1 millisecond. Pretty tough, right? Okay, save it and let's run it. As expected, see now, instead of the green check mark, we have a red X. And not only that, at the bottom we have a message with a return code different than 0, indicating that some thresholds failed. Let's go and add another one. To add more thresholds, first, if they are under the same metric, we do it inside those regular brackets I mentioned earlier. Here you can add more for that same metrics. So let's pick one more from the available variables for that metric. How about the maximum duration? Generally, that is another one to keep under check. So we add a comma and then specify the variable to which we will apply the new threshold, max. To make an easy pass, it must be smaller than, let's say, 10 seconds, or in milliseconds, 10,000. And now we save it and run it. Alright, another green mark, woohoo! But beware, both must pass. If only one of the thresholds is not passed, we'll get another red mark. Let's do that quickly. Again, we change the average to 1 millisecond, so of course, something non-realistic. Let's run it. So here, only the max will pass, and the average will fail, thus failing the whole thing. To keep moving, let's quickly make it passable again, so we can add one more in that same metric. How about the 90% to be also under 3 seconds? Let's run it. Again, all cool, passing with still one green check. Okay, now we have created our first set of thresholds for a single metric. Multiple thresholds on one metric, similar to what we mentioned in the previous examples in the previous video. Now let's move on and add another threshold, but now on another metric. Let's do it over the iteration duration. For that, we just add a new line inside of the threshold section, write iteration duration, and again, inside brackets, let's just add that threshold over the medium, to be more than 1 millisecond. Easy to pass. Save and run. Easy peasy. Now we have another check mark in our runs output. Two base metrics with their own set of thresholds. Woohoo! Moving on. Thresholds do not work only on the basic metrics. You can create custom metrics and apply a threshold to it or to them. So let's see how to do it. First, I am going to bring a script from the documentation that already has a custom metric defined. Again, if you want to learn more about custom metrics, it is right there in the documentation. On this script, we already have custom metrics named failed requests. It is a rate metric, the type rate. To create a threshold on it, we follow a very similar pattern to the standard metrics and what we used before, only with the little difference that we must place its name in between single quotes. Then the rest is the same. Inside regular brackets, we create thresholds on the variables of the type of the custom metric. Since the custom metric failed requests is a rate type, we can only evaluate over the rate. So we type rate as the name of the variable and the threshold to be smaller than, let's say, 0.1. Save and run. As you can see, we have an extra metric displayed there together with its respective green check mark. With that, we have created another threshold, but now for a custom metric. Woohoo! As you can see, K6 has a very straightforward process to implement the thresholds in the standard metrics and custom metrics. But now, let's go over another two elements that you can apply thresholds to as well. Those other elements are groups and tags. We can apply thresholds to groups and to tags in a very similar way to how we did it to the metrics. So let's check them quickly. Here, I have an example script that already has tags and groups created. If you want to learn more about them, again, please go to the tags and groups section in the documentation page. In this script, there is a group and tag already created. The group is named group duration. It has inside some metrics such as individual requests and batch requests. So let's write up the thresholds for them. As you can see, we declare them in between single quotes, very similar to the custom metrics. The only difference here is that instead of the custom metric name, we will add curly brackets at the end. and add the instruction group name, and then after a colon, the names for each group. In this case, individual and for the next batch requests. Both of them are also of the trend type, so let's create the threshold on the average. We want them to be smaller than, let's say, this amount for both. Now, before we run this, quickly let's add as well a threshold for a tag, the other tag that we have. We have another in the HTTP request duration named API. So again, in the same way of the single quotes, we write the name of the metric, HTTP request duration, but again, within the curly brackets, now we will write type as the tag and specify it to be API. For this threshold, we will set it on the 95 percentile. Same inside of the brackets, we add the 95% and put the threshold to be smaller than 5,000. Now, let's save it and check it. As you can see, the script completed and had passes indicating them within the green checks in the respective metrics. Yay! And speaking of completed, before we finish, thresholds as well can be configured not to allow the script to finish if any threshold inside of it doesn't pass. The last components of a threshold are a couple of identifiers that we can add at the end. By default, case 6 keeps running if thresholds do not pass. So the first element that we can add is an indicator to stop everything if the threshold fails, any threshold. The second is an indicator of how long to wait before stopping after the threshold did not pass or had a problem. For the sake of time, let's quickly view them in the first example for the script. Here, a quick difference is that if inside of the regular brackets of the metric, we will separate and type the thresholds inside of curly brackets to define more elements. Here, we add the other elements, abort on fail, and delay abort eval, giving you even more control to your scripts. And well, amigos, as I said, for the sake of time, with that, you now have learned some examples on the types of thresholds and how to implement them in case 6. I hope that you enjoyed this episode, and if you have any questions about this, don't doubt to submit them over the channels that the case 6 team has for help and support. My name is Leandro, aka Señor Performo. Thank you very much. See you on the next adventure. Adiós, amigos.